Most people think billionaires sit in rooms for weeks. Whiteboards. Analysts. 200-page reports. Wrong. The average manager delays decisions for days. The average entrepreneur overthinks for months. Meanwhile, people like Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and Warren Buffett make billion-dollar calls in minutes. Not because they're reckless, because they use a different operating system. And once you understand it, you'll never hesitate the same way again. Chapter 1. They decide at the right altitude. Here's your first mistake. You treat every decision like it's life or death. What gym should I join? Should I send this email? Should I start the business? Should I invest? You zoom in too far. Billionaires zoom out. Jeff Bezos calls this Type 1 versus Type 2 decisions. Type 1 are one-way doors, hard to reverse. Type 2 are two-way doors, easy to undo. Most decisions in your life, two-way doors. Try it. If it fails, reverse it. But average people treat two-way doors like nuclear launch codes. They freeze. Bezos doesn't. He says most decisions should be made with 70% of the information. Waiting for 90%? Too slow. By then, the opportunity is gone. This isn't motivational fluff. It's cognitive load theory. Your brain has limited working memory. Psychologists call it the bottleneck. The more variables you juggle, the slower you move. Billionaires don't add variables. They remove them. They ask one question. Is this reversible? If yes, move. If no, slow down. That's it. Warren Buffett makes billion-dollar investments based on simple filters. He doesn't evaluate everything. He has rules, circle of competence, long-term moat, strong management. If it fails one filter, he passes. No emotion. No debate. Most people try to analyze infinite options. Buffett analyzes 5. Scarcity of focus creates speed. But here's the problem though. Even if you know which decisions are reversible, you'll still hesitate. Why? Because you're afraid of being wrong. Chapter 2. They detach ego from outcome. Average people don't fear bad decisions. They fear looking stupid. That's ego. Elon Musk has shut down projects publicly, killed products, changed direction overnight. Why? Because he optimizes for truth, not pride. Psychologist Carol Dweck calls this a growth mindset. But let's go deeper. When you identify with being right, your brain treats being wrong like a threat. Threat triggers cortisol. Cortisol narrows thinking. You become rigid. Rigid minds move slow. Flexible minds move fast. Billionaires assume they're wrong by default. Ray Dalio built Bridgewater on radical transparency. He records meetings. People criticize each other openly. Brutal. Why? Because error detection is faster than ego protection. If someone can prove you wrong in 60 seconds, good. You just saved months. Most people defend. Elite performers update. Jeff Bezos writes shareholder letters about being wrong. Publicly. Repeatedly. You know what that does? It trains the brain to detach identity from decision. When you stop protecting your ego, decisions become math. Input. Output. Adjust. No drama. But here's the thing though. Detaching ego still doesn't explain the speed. You still need a mechanism. Chapter 3. They use decision frameworks, not feelings. Average person wakes up and decides emotionally. Do I feel like doing this? Does this seem right? Feelings are slow. They fluctuate. Billionaires install frameworks. Charlie Munger calls it a lattice work of mental models. Instead of guessing, they run checklists in their head. Inversion. What would make this fail? Opportunity cost. What am I not doing instead? Second-order effects. What happens after this happens? You don't need genius IQ for this. You need structure. Psychologist Daniel Kahneman explains this in Thinking, Fast and Slow. System 1 is fast, but biased. System 2 is slow, but analytical. Average people let System 1 dominate. Billionaires pre-train System 2 with rules, so decisions feel fast, but are structured. It's like chess. Grandmasters don't calculate every move from scratch. They recognize patterns, chunking. Research on expertise shows masters compress thousands of scenarios into mental scripts. So when a decision appears, they don't start thinking, they recognize. That's why it looks instant. Warren Buffett once said he makes most big decisions in 5 minutes. Not because he's impulsive, because he's seen the pattern before. You haven't built patterns, you're improvising. Improvisation is slow. Frameworks are fast. By the way, hit subscribe before you overthink that too. We fix hesitation here. But here's the problem though. Even with frameworks, most people still stall. Why? Because they confuse thinking with progress. Chapter 4. They bias toward action. Most people believe thinking longer improves decisions. Wrong. There's something called analysis paralysis. The more options you evaluate, the less satisfied you become. Psychologist Barry Schwartz calls this the paradox of choice. More data doesn't equal better decisions. It equals delay. Billionaires understand something brutal. Speed compounds. A mediocre decision executed fast often beats a perfect decision executed late. Amazon runs experiments constantly. Small bets. Quick tests, they don't debate endlessly. They launch, then measure, then adjust. This is Bayesian thinking. You start with a hypothesis. You gather data. You update probability. Decision-making becomes iterative, not final. Average people treat decisions like tattoos, permanent. Elite treat them like whiteboard notes, editable. Reversible decisions should be made quickly, Bezos says. Slow decisions are for irreversible ones. You delay both, that's the mistake. And here's the neuroscience. Action reduces anxiety. When you delay, your brain simulates negative outcomes repeatedly. This strengthens fear pathways. When you act, uncertainty collapses into feedback. Feedback is information. Information reduces fear. So the fastest way to feel confident? Move. But here's the final layer. Even if you move fast, you can still make terrible decisions, unless you install this. Chapter 5. They define the downside first. Before making a move, billionaires ask one brutal question. What's the worst-case scenario? Not in a dramatic way, in a calculated way. Jeff Bezos uses regret minimization. He imagines himself at 80 years old. Will he regret not trying? If the downside is survivable, he moves. If it's catastrophic, he slows down. Naval Ravikant says, play long-term games with long-term people. Translation. Avoid decisions that can destroy reputation or integrity. Protect the downside. George Soros once said it's not whether you're right or wrong, but how much you make when you're right and how much you lose when you're wrong. Asymmetry. If upside is 10 times and downside is 1 time, you take the bet repeatedly. Even if you're wrong half the time, you win. Most people evaluate decisions emotionally. Billionaires evaluate expected value. Probability times payoff. That's math, not magic. And once you think in expected value, speed becomes rational. You don't need certainty. You need positive asymmetry. Now let's put this together. They decide at the right altitude. They detach ego. They use frameworks. They bias toward action. They define downside first. That's the system. But here's the uncomfortable truth. You already knew most of this. You just don't apply it. Why? Because hesitation feels safe. Movement feels risky. But in a fast world, hesitation is the real risk. You think you're being careful. You're being slow, and slow is expensive. Time is the only asset you can't compound. Every week you delay a decision is a week someone else moves. And speed builds confidence. Confidence builds opportunity. Opportunity builds leverage. Leverage builds wealth. It compounds. Here's the thing though. You can install these rules today, but if your brain is still cluttered with distraction, if you can't focus for more than 5 minutes without checking your phone, none of this matters. Fast decisions require clear thinking. Clear thinking requires cognitive control. And most people have none. That's why I made a video breaking down the exact mental training billionaires use to think clearly under pressure. Because speed without clarity is chaos, and clarity without speed is useless. If you want the unfair advantage, watch that next. Create a new script and title.